Welcome to another edition of the News Review. In this edition, U.S. President Joe Biden reiterates his country's strong support for Kiev in the Ukraine war. Biden says Washington is focused on boosting Ukraine's air defenses as Russia pushes with airstrikes on the country's energy infrastructure. He made the comments in a phone call with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Ukrainian president said that they also discussed further defense cooperation and protection of his country's energy sector. The U.S. and its Western allies have already announced billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine. Russia, however, says that continued supply of Western weapons to Kiev will only prolong the war. To discuss that further, we're joined by our correspondent Johnny Miller, who is joining us live from Moscow. And also we have with us Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author, joining us from London. So, Johnny, if you could please give us an update on the situation in Ukraine.
Yes, so the major flashpoint at the moment in terms of the frontline fighting is around the town of Bakhmut, or Artemovsk in Russian. It's in the north and Donbass region. Russia has been trying to take that city or town for months. It looks like they are having some major success there. It's been described as hell on earth. Some other people describe it as a meat grinder for Ukrainian soldiers, as Russia has overwhelming artillery superiority and reports that a huge loss of life, particularly on the Ukrainian side currently. That's Russia's main aim at the moment, to take the rest of the Donbass region, particularly Slavyansk, which supplies water to Donetsk. Of course, there has been some major success by Ukraine in recent months in in the Kharkov region and Kherson. It looks like Russia at the moment on the front foot in terms of the frontline fighting.
So, Marcus Papadopoulos, considering what our correspondent just told us about the situation on the ground there, and we also had U.S. President Joe Biden reiterating that his country will continue to support Kiev, which of course means military support. Do you see an end in sight to the situation?
Stance of the elites on the war in Ukraine constitute a case of dissonance. On the one hand, the Western ruling describe the war in Ukraine horrendous, as all wars, including the bombing of Serbia, the invasion of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, the bombing of Libya, and the war against the people of Yemen. But on the other hand, the Western ruling elites, instead of seeking a political settlement to end the fighting in Ukraine and to end the suffering of the population there, are continuing to send vast amounts of weaponry to the Ukrainian government, which will only prolong the war. And it should also be said that no matter what kind of weaponry the West sends to the Ukrainian government, this will not alter what will be the eventual outcome of the war, namely a Russian victory. Because when I say, as I have said since the 24th of February of this year, that Russia is winning the war, I mean in this way. Firstly, that Russia has captured a very substantial part of Ukraine. And secondly, the Russians, almost from day one, have been waging a war of attrition against the Ukrainian armed forces, specifically by using their artillery. Now, historically speaking, Russian artillery is preeminent in the world. And as a result of this war of attrition, the Ukrainian armed forces have incurred colossal casualties. According to the European Union, 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in action. According to the Russian government, nearly 200,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in action. And according to independent military analysts, the figure is close to 180,000. But if we take the figure put forward by the European Union, namely 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed in action, that is simply a horrendous loss of life, and the Ukrainian armed forces cannot sustain these huge losses. What we see at the moment in Bakhmut, or as the Russians call it, Artemovsk, is a meat grinder, specifically through the use of Russian artillery. Remember, Russia can call up 25 million soldiers. The Russian industrial military complex was created in Soviet times and has been maintained ever since then to fight a war with America. That is why Russia is a military superpower. That is why Russia's military industrial complex is a superpower. And that is why Russia will win in Ukraine.
So, Johnny, do you believe that Russia will win in Ukraine?
Well, I agree with a lot of what your other guest has said. The Russians seem quite composed at the moment and confident and happy to play the long game as well. I think there has been a high number of Russian soldiers killed, particularly Donbass soldiers and private soldiers. It's difficult to know the exact numbers, but Russia at the moment very keen to minimize their losses, which is why they are moving quite slowly, using the overwhelming artillery power. But there seems to be an endless amount of money going to Ukraine at the moment, and so many of this money being spent on weapons is being blown up by Russia. This money literally going up in smoke, blown up by Russia before they get to the front line or when they get to the front line, causing huge damage to the energy infrastructure of Ukraine as well. And there's a feeling that the longer the war goes on, the more NATO can continue to support Ukraine, simply the more of Ukraine will be destroyed and the more Ukrainians will lose their lives. It's very difficult to see how Ukraine is going to take back some of these territories. I mean, some Ukrainians and people in NATO saying that Ukraine will take back Crimea. I can't see that happening, quite frankly. It's very difficult to see how Ukraine can win on the battlefield, and certainly the advantage is with Russia at the moment, and it looks to stay that way.
So, Marcus, what would the world look like after this war?
Well, what we are witness to at the moment is the formation of a new Russian state, the enlargement of Russia, because for nearly 100, because the Russia the world has been used to since the end of the dissolution of the Soviet Union is the smallest Russia in geographical terms for nearly 150 years. So a new Russia is being born. And once the Russian army is victorious in Ukraine, which will mean either all of Ukraine or most of Ukraine will be absorbed into the Russian Federation, then Russia will become even more powerful, will become even more of a superpower. Why? Because Russia will gain a large East Slavic Orthodox population, Russia will gain a large industrial sector, and will gain a large agricultural sector by capturing either all or most of Ukraine. And a Russia which becomes even more powerful will mean the absolute end of the Western global order, which was established following the dissolution of the Soviet Union and which enabled America to do as it pleased during the 1990s and throughout the 2000s. So whilst America will remain a superpower and will remain formidable in all four corners of the world, nonetheless, a new Russia, a more powerful Russia, will constitute a massive counterbalance to American unilateralism and will be able to prevent American military adventures wherever they may be in the world.
Thank you very much, Marcus Papadopoulos, a historian, political analyst, and author from London. Also, our correspondent Johnny Miller, live from Moscow. Thanks to both of you gentlemen for sharing your thoughts and views with us on this edition of the News Review. And thank you for watching this edition.